When I saw the silhouette of the wolf pup at the gate, my breath caught because I knew he came for a reason. It was a warm summer evening, the kind when the sun dips low and the air hums with moisture. I sat alone on my porch, the dense taiga pressing up against the lawn like a living wall. Crickets whispered behind me, the scent of pine and damp earth curled around my senses. Everything felt usual until I noticed something dark moving at the edge of the yard. At first, I thought it was a stray dog, perhaps a neighbor's pet that had wandered too far. I stood, muscles tense, and took a step down the creaking wooden steps. The shape paused, then shifted. My heart pounded as I realized those weren't floppy ears or a wagging tail. Those were pointed ears, alert and unmoving, and a tail stiff behind a small, matted body. Inch by inch I approached, every footstep shrinking the distance. When I was only a few yards away, the pup turned its head and looked at me directly. Its fur was thin and streaked with mud, ribs showed faintly beneath its coat. Yet in its eyes, ice-cold, unwavering, there was no hint of fear. It settled itself on the grass as if it belonged there, folding its paws neatly, and stared. Not a whine, not a whimper, not a whiny bark, only stillness. I found myself frozen, unsure whether to speak, to move, even to breathe. The pup neither shied nor attacked, it simply waited. The moon began its ascent, bathing the clearing in a pale glow, and the shadows of the forest deepened around us. Despite the loneliness of the scene, I felt watched by something far wiser than any dog I had ever met. At that moment, I realized the first terrible truth: this animal was not lost. He had not stumbled into my yard by chance. He came here deliberately. The notion sent a chill sharper than any winter breeze down my spine. My fingers tightened around the railing as the wolf pup closed his eyes and rested his head on his forepaws. He looked as exhausted as he was purposeful, as if he had walked for miles with a single mission. A false calm settled over me. I thought I understood. He must be starving, disoriented, desperate for water or food. Any moment now he'd lurch forward, nose to the ground, guided by the smell of my porch light and the promise of sustenance. I pictured myself filling a bowl, offering him kindness, a dog too thin to survive another night in the forest. But then the wind rustled the trees and something in the pup's posture shifted. His ears twitched, his breath quickened. He lifted his head, glanced once toward the dark tree-line, then back at me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. It was as if he were sending a message: watch closely, this is only the beginning. I wanted to take a step back, to retreat into the safety of my house, but my body would not obey. I felt pinned by fascination and a dawning dread that this encounter was not about mercy. It was about communion. The pup rose to his paws and sat up straighter, as though preparing for something I wasn't meant to see but could not look away from. Time thinned. Each second stretched into a lifetime of anticipation. The crickets fell silent. The forest seemed to inhale, waiting with me. I realized I was holding my breath, heart hammering so loudly I feared he would hear it. And then, just as I braced myself to act, the wolf pup turned his head one last time toward me, and his eyes flickered with an emotion I couldn't name: relief, perhaps gratitude, maybe even sorrow. He did not howl or call. He did not tremble or panic. He simply stood, muscles tensed, and slipped backward a few steps before turning smoothly toward the black line of trees. My mind screamed for him to stay, to look for water, for kindness, for understanding. But he vanished into the night with the silence of a falling leaf. I thought he was lost, that he had stumbled and come to beg for water, and I nearly convinced myself I could leave it at that. But deep in my chest, I felt a tremor of knowing this was not the end. Not by a long shot. Something had been set in motion, something that would change the way I saw every shadow and every howl under the moon. I stayed on the porch long after he disappeared, listening to the echo of his departure. My pulse throbbed in my temples, and I wondered what had compelled him to step onto my land with such unwavering purpose. One thing was certain: I had become part of a story far larger than myself. And I could not yet imagine the depths to which it would plunge me. When night fell, sleep fled before the memory of that gate. Every creak of the porch, every rustle in the pines, felt like an echo of the wolf pup's paw steps. I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and pine needles. The moonlight sliced through the curtains in pale slashes, and I knew he was still out there. I climbed the steps quietly and peered into the yard. There he was. The same thin silhouette against the grass, curled as though he'd claimed this place. His muzzle rested on his paws, eyes half closed, breathing slow and regular. He hadn't run off. He hadn't vanished like a shadow. He simply waited. Morning came in pale gray. The first light revealed dew on the grass and the distant wall of trees. But the pup remained where he'd spent the night. I carried a bowl of cool water and set it down a few feet from him. He lifted his head and drank deeply, then looked up at me with an expression that felt like gratitude, and something more ancient, something grounded in wild memory. He did not approach. He simply drank, then lay back down. As I went inside, memories surfaced. Decades ago, I tracked packs across frozen tundra, watched wolves skirt our camps, shining eyes at the firelight before melting back into the forest. They were fierce, secretive, untrusting of humans. This pup bore none of that wariness. His posture was calm, his gaze direct. I found myself unsettled by the difference. By midday, word had spread. Through half-open windows, I heard neighbors whispering, "Did you see the wild dog?" They wanted to chase it off, worried it might be rabid. I stepped onto my porch, hands raised. "He's not dangerous," I said, voice steady though my heart raced. "He needs rest." They muttered among themselves, but left me to it. I felt the weight of their stares even after they'd gone. That night, the air grew colder. I watched from my window as the pup stretched, rose, and padded over to the fence. He paused, turned his head toward the forest as if listening for a signal. For a moment, the gleam in his eyes made my pulse thunder. Then he lay back down, settling into the grass as though nothing had happened. I sighed and leaned against the sill. I thought, he's lost. He's tired. He'll find help or his pack and move on by morning. I could rest then, but in the black hours before dawn, a soft scraping sound woke me. I threw back the covers and slipped outside. The pup was on his feet again, ears pricked toward the trees. I felt the momentum of something unseen drawing him away. He hesitated at the gate, looked back at me with that impossible stillness, and then slipped into the darkness. My breath caught. I called his name, but the forest swallowed my words. I stood there until the sky hinted at dawn, heart hammering, convinced I'd never see him again. When the sun rose, I hurried outside, panic in every step. The grass was empty. No pup, no bowl of water licked clean. My throat ached from shouting. I paced the yard, scanning the tree line. Surely, I thought, he'll return. An hour passed. Then, there he was, padding back toward the porch. But he was not alone. Behind him, half hidden by the mist, another shape emerged. A second wolf pup, younger, more fragile. His fur was almost white, stained brown where he'd crawled through mud and underbrush. He limped on one leg, and each step looked like a struggle. My heart lurched. The first pup paused, turned to the newcomer, and nuzzled him gently. He lowered his head in the smallest of bows, an act of recognition and reassurance. Then they both approached the water bowl. The newcomer drank with hasty gulps. The first pup watched him, eyes soft. I stood frozen, uncertain whether to rejoice or recoil. I knelt and stretched out my hand, voice trembling. "It's okay," I whispered. "You're safe here." The first pup lifted his gaze, and I saw in it a trust so profound it almost wrenched my chest. He had brought this injured sibling to me, knowing I could help. Tears blurred my vision as I guided the limping pup onto the porch. He didn't pull away. He flinched only once, then closed his eyes as I lifted him gently. I carried him inside, laid a blanket on the floor, and began cleaning the wound with water I warmed over the stove. All the while, I could feel the first pup watching through the window, paws tucked neatly, as though guarding both of us. I thought, I was right, he is lost, but lost in a way I'd never understood. He wasn't simply a wild animal in need. He was a messenger, a bridge between my lonely world and the untamed heart of the forest. I laid my hand on the injured pup's side, feeling his faint heartbeat. The first pup pressed his nose to the glass, as if checking that we were both still here. A flicker of hope passed through me, mingled with the same thrill of disbelief I'd felt at the gate. I whispered, I'll help you both. But deep down, I knew this was only the eye of the storm. The real marvel was just beginning, and I had no idea how far it would reach. At first light, a soft rustle stirred me from sleep. My eyes flew open to the pale glow of dawn seeping through the curtains. I slipped outside in bare feet, heart pounding with a mix of hope and dread. The yard was still wet with dew, the grass cool beneath my soles. There where the wolf pups had drank and rested stood the smaller one, alert but calm. I exhaled in relief, then froze. Beside him, emerging from the shadowy treeline, was a massive she-wolf. She moved slowly, each step deliberate and painful. One hind leg dragged, and her flanks rose in labored breaths. Under the paling sky, her matted fur glistened with moisture. She was ancient, far older than any wild wolf I'd seen, and her battered body spoke of battles long fought. For a moment, she simply watched me. No snarls, no whimpers, no challenge. Her eyes, rimmed in silver, held unbearable depths, a plea, a farewell, a regret. The smaller pup pressed against her side, nuzzling the ragged fur where her ribs showed faintly through the coat. Together, they radiated a sorrow too heavy for words. My chest tightened. I thought I understood compassion, yet this was something remote, elemental. These creatures, fierce as any legends, had ventured into my world not to fight but to seek solace. The she-wolf hobbled forward and settled on her haunches, head bowed. She closed her eyes as though bracing herself for rest. The pup lay across her paws, warm and trusting. Then all sound stilled. There was no wind, no bird song, no rustle of leaves. Only the steady inhale, exhale of her final breaths. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. Memories of a lifetime among nature's wonders flashed through my mind, tracking wolves across frozen plains, glimpsing their midnight rendezvous under stars, hearing distant howls that spoke of unity and survival. I'd never seen one sacrifice so utterly. A bird called somewhere far off. The she-wolf's ears twitched, but she did not lift her head. Her breathing slowed, then stopped. The pup gave a soft whine and nudged her side, but she only lay still. I wanted to call out, to run to them, to offer what little comfort I could. But my legs would not obey. I watched, paralyzed, as life slipped away from a creature born to roam free. I thought she was merely exhausted, that after a moment's rest she would rise and return to the forest. I waited, holding my breath, willing a miracle. But nothing moved. The pup lifted his head and let out a single, trembling howl, sharp and desperate. Its echo broke the dawn's hush like shattered glass. Then he sank back to his mother's side, pressing his muzzle against her shoulder. His whimpers faded into silence. A bird began to sing, tentative at first, then more boldly, as if reclaiming the morning. The forest exhaled a low sigh. And still she lay there, motionless. I crossed the yard in several stumbling steps, finally reaching the she-wolf's side. My hand hovered above her head, uncertain whether to touch. The smaller pup circled me once, eyes wary but gentle, then settled at my feet. I sat on the grass, tears blurring the dawn's light. I whispered words I'd never thought I'd say to a wild animal. Thank you. Thank you for trusting me. He looked up, that wolf pup, eyes shining with something like understanding, and gave a solemn nod before turning his gaze back to the forest. He did not leave. He simply sat, as though keeping vigil, as though anchoring his mother's spirit against the coming night. I knelt and laid a hand on the she-wolf's flank. Her fur was rough and cold. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of her passing settle in my bones. It was not grief I felt, exactly, but a profound awe and acknowledgement of a debt I could never repay. The false calm of dawn felt hollow now. I thought this was the end, that she had come only to rest and would then vanish beyond the treeline. But she would never walk again. The pup would remain, tied to her memory, tied to this moment. And I, a lone witness, would carry the story of their final journey in my heart forever. When the morning sun crested the pines, I whispered my vow, I will not let her trust be forgotten. Behind me, the small pup gave a low, measured bark, a single note of promise and farewell. Then he rose, patted once around his mother, and stepped toward me. He paused under the porch light as though waiting for permission. I met his gaze, my breath trembling. He nudged my hand with his cold nose. As the first ray of sunlight touched his fur, I felt the truth sink in. This was not a chance encounter. It was a gift. And though she would never return to the forest she once ruled, her story and his would live on here, in a small yard at the edge of the taiga, where a man learned that wild hearts can ask for more than mercy, they can ask for remembrance. When I stepped into the yard at dawn, the air was thick with silence. The rain began as a soft whisper against the pine needles, then swelled into a steady patter that soaked the grass and soaked me through. I stopped short. There, curled at the foot of the porch steps, lay the she-wolf. Her coat was matted, drenched, and she did not stir. Beside her, the pup pressed his muzzle against her snout, his little tongue flicking in gentle, rhythmic laps. He nudged her shoulder, then licked again. Nothing. My heart thundered in my chest. I thought, she must rouse any moment now. She must lift her head, flex her paws, shake off the weariness of battle and exhaustion. But she lay still, eyes half closed, breathing shallow. The pup stood, stretched awkwardly, and patted a circle around her. He came back and nestled his small body against hers as though sharing warmth. Then he rose and looked at me with those unwavering eyes. I stepped closer, rain dripping from my jacket. The pup did not step between us to guard her. He simply watched, silent and alert, offering no defense. I knelt at her side, trembling. I reached out and his gaze followed my hand, but he did not pull away. I touched the coarse fur along her shoulder, feeling the wetness and the tremor in her muscles. When the first heavy drops began to fall, I wondered if the rain could cleanse her pain, if the earth might swallow her sorrow. But she did not move. I could hear my own ragged breath, and somewhere in the forest a crow called, a solitary note against the storm. The pup's head lifted at the sound, his ears perked, but he did not bark. He only stood poised between grief and understanding. I realized then that this wolf had chosen me not as an enemy to be chased off, not as a stranger to be feared, but as a witness to her final passage. My hands shook as I fetched a shovel from the shed. The rain pounded relentlessly, turning the soil slick and heavy. The pup followed, paused, leaving small impressions in the mud. I paused, meeting his eyes. He did not shy away. He did not plead. He waited. Each shovelful of earth felt like a betrayal. I scraped the ground, heaving sod and clay, uncovering the pale, virgin soil beneath. Water pooled at my feet, rain washing the trench deeper, but I could not stop. The pup sat at the edge, his gaze fixed on me, his body still as though bracing against some internal storm. When the hole was deep enough, I knelt again beside her. I laid my coat gently over her shoulders as one would cover a friend's shivering frame. The rain blurred my vision, but I saw the pup lean forward, pressing his nose into the fabric as if saying goodbye. Then he leapt back, stood on trembling legs, and let out a single, heart-pounding howl. It cut through the downpour, a crisp, urgent cry that echoed off the trees and shook my bones. As the echo died, I thought he would bound away, vanishing with the rain. A false calm settled over me. I imagined him returning to the pack or perishing alone in the forest. I closed my eyes, tasting the salt of tears mingled with rain. But when I opened them, the pup was still there. He sat at the head of the grave, body tense, eyes locked on my face. He did not look at the open earth, he did not glance toward the forest. He only waited. The rain began to slacken, a soft drizzle now, and I lowered the shovel. I stepped back, uncertain what to do next. He did not flinch. Instead, he sank to his haunches and curled his tail around his paws as though settling in for a vigil. His head rested on his forelegs and he let out a soft whine, barely more than a breath, then closed his eyes. Night would come again in a few hours. I considered going inside, leaving him to his watch. But something in those patient breaths stilled my limbs. I laid down my tools, covered the grave with the last clods of earth, and pressed my hand to the mound. The soil was cool and fragrant, the scent of pine and rain and loss. I knelt there until the light faded, feeling each heartbeat as if it were a drum calling me to remember. The pup did not stir. He did not slink away or seek comfort elsewhere. He stayed, sentinel over the final resting place of the she-wolf who had led him here. When darkness crept in and the first stars blinked through the canopy, I whispered a vow. I will not forget her. I will not leave you alone. He lifted his head at my words, eyes shining in the dim light. Then he laid down once more, folded his paws, and closed his eyes for the night, guarding her memory and anchoring me to a truth I could not deny, that sometimes the wild chooses us, and in bearing witness, we become a part of its story forever. When the first pale light of dawn brushed the treetops, I watched the little wolf pup slip back into the forest. My heart clenched as he vanished between the pines, and I almost believed this was his last farewell. Each day that followed, I half expected to arrive at the gate and find only silence. But every evening, just as the shadows stretched long across the yard, he'd appear. He never came at sunrise or midday. He waited until the light softened, then padded through the wet grass and sat beside the small mound of earth I'd made for his mother. He never wandered farther than a few feet from her resting place. For nights I did nothing but watch him from the porch. My breath fluttered in my chest when he first returned and our eyes met in the falling dusk. Fear pricked at my skin, fear that he might bolt, that I'd driven him from the only shelter he had, fear that I was trespassing in a world I didn't belong. Yet he stayed. He did not growl, did not bare teeth. He only looked at me, calm and unwavering. On the fourth evening, I set out a piece of bread on a flat stone 15 feet from the grave. I retreated behind the railing, heart pounding. He approached the bread with slow, deliberate steps. He sniffed once, retreated 2 paces, then returned and walked away entirely. I thought he would never touch it. But by the 7th night, I moved the bread closer, 10 feet, then 5, and he still waited until I stepped back before he crept forward. His body was stiff, every muscle tense. He didn't eat until my hand had retreated fully into the shadow of the porch. Each crumb he cracked with his jaws felt like a gift, and I held my breath until the last flake was gone. That night, I lay in bed wrestling with what I'd done. He entrusted me with his mother's body. He entrusted me with her memory. And yet he had chosen to remain here, under my watch. I whispered into the darkness, "Why do you trust me?" On the 10th day, I dared something new. I held out a piece of bread in my fist and stood at the edge of the porch. My palm trembled. The pup rose from his vigil by the grave, padded forward, and stopped 3 feet away. His ears tilted forward, eyes bright. I held my breath. He took 2 cautious steps, then lowered his muzzle and carried the bread off in his jaws without a sound. My chest tightened as I realized he'd accepted the offering from my hand. A tremor of triumph came, but it was laced with grief. I remembered his mother's last breath, the howl that tore through the rain, the helplessness in his small body, and now this moment of fragile peace. I thought this was it. I thought he would stay here, tethered to the grave, tethered to me until the end of his days. But the next dawn brought the unexpected. I stepped outside to collect the empty water bowl and, through the thinning morning mist, I saw not 1 silhouette, but 2. The pup sat as always beside the mound, but at his side lay another newcomer, a second wolf pup, smaller, formatted and eyes glazed with exhaustion. My pulse hammered so hard I feared he'd hear it. The first pup nudged the newcomer with his nose, then glanced at me. In that look was a question, an invitation. "Will you help us both?" I knelt before them, breath ragged. The second pup lifted his head weakly and sniffed at my outstretched hand. My fingers brushed his damp fur and he closed his eyes in relief. The first pup sat back, watching while I scooped the younger one into my arms. I carried him inside, heart pounding with a mix of awe and dread. As I cleaned his wounds by the stove's orange glow, I realized the truth. This boy had come because he needed me. His brother had led him through darkness, had chosen me as a guide, as a guardian. And now I could not refuse. I fetched food for them both and watched as the first pup ate at my feet, then the second had his fill. They lay side by side, breathing softly, a pair of sorrow and hope intertwined. If your heart is racing now, if you feel that electric spark of wonder, subscribe to the channel. Here we share the truth. Nature is stranger and kinder than you imagine. I stepped outside once more into the cool morning air. They rose when they saw me, tails low but wagging in small circles. I knelt in the grass and held out my hand again. The first pup came forward, then the second, and together they pressed their muzzles into my palm. That moment, 2 wild siblings choosing me, choosing trust, I will carry with me always. And soon, I knew their story would reach beyond this yard, beyond the forest line, into the hearts of anyone willing to believe in an impossible kindness. When I found him the next morning, my breath caught in my throat. The younger pup lay in the grass by the gate, ribs visible under his thin coat, a dark stain mottling his side. He shivered, eyes half closed, as though he were caught between this world and the next. Panic seized me. I scooped him into my arms and carried him inside, each step heavy with dread. The older pup padded beside me, head low but eyes bright, as if guiding me. I laid the youngster on the kitchen floor, tore open my first aid kit, and knelt beside him. His side was raw, an ugly wound that wept dark fluid onto the tile. He did not cry out. He did not struggle. He lay rigid, trusting me to help. My fingers trembled as I cleaned the wound with antiseptic, each touch making his small body flinch. I murmured apologies between my teeth. I'm so sorry, as I bound the cut with gauze. The older pup sat patiently at the threshold. His gaze never left me. I realized then that this was more than simple trust. He had chosen me because there was no one else to choose. He had carried his wounded brother through the darkness to my door, and he would stand by me until the end. After I finished, I wrapped the younger pup in a blanket and placed him in a box lined with towels. He closed his eyes as though exhausted from the effort of breathing. The older pup lay beside the box, nose resting on the edge, silent vigil. I paced the room, mind racing. Memories flashed, the wolf pup's first appearance at my gate, the she-wolf's final breath in the rain, the older pup's howl that so pierced my soul. I thought, this is more than a favor. This is a bond. An unspoken promise between our worlds. I filled a shallow tray with water and set it near them. The older pup lapped at it, then nudged the box until the younger one stirred and drank. Relief spread through me, so sharp it almost hurt. I whispered into the soft hush of the room, "You're safe now. I won't let you down." They stayed together all day. The older pup never strayed more than a few feet. When I left to fetch more supplies, he watched me go. When I returned, he was waiting at the threshold, eyes bright with expectation. That night, I placed both pups in a makeshift den in the shed with blankets and a heat lamp. I spoke to them in a low voice, offering bits of cooked meat. The older pup ate eagerly, the younger one nibbled weakly, eyes closing between bites. My heart pounded at each labored inhale he made. I settled on the shed floor between them and fell asleep, half sitting, half lying, arms wrapped around the box. I thought I had seen the depths of their courage and their desperation. I thought, maybe, now they would both recover and leave together, one healed little brother and his steadfast guardian disappearing side by side back into the forest. But in the black hours before dawn, the younger pup's breathing changed. His chest trembled and I woke with a start. I reached out to stroke his head, but his eyes were already gone. His body lay limp, still warm, as though the spark that had carried him here had flickered out. I pressed my face to his little neck, hot tears soaking the blankets. I whispered his name over and over, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." The older pup rose with a soft whine and nuzzled the lifeless form. He let out a single howl, low, wrenching, carrying all the sorrow of the wild, and then he flattened himself against the box, as though trying to revive his brother with his presence. I held them both through the night, unable to move, caught between grief and the primal need to protect. When dawn crept in, I knew I could not leave him there. With shaking hands, I carried the young pup to the grave I dug for his mother and laid him beside her. The older pup followed, padding behind me in steady steps. I covered him gently with earth, each shovelful a blow to my chest, and all the while he sat at the edge, head bowed. After the last handful of soil settled, he let out another short, mournful howl. I thought then he might stay forever an eternal sentinel. I whispered my promise once more, "I will not forget you." But when I returned to the porch the next evening, the yard was empty. No footprints in the mud. No flicker of movement at the treeline. For 3 days, there was only silence. I stood at the gate each dusk, waiting for the familiar shape. But no pup ever came back. And in that void, I understood that the bond we'd forged was fragile, a gift of trust given and taken away. Yet even in absence, their story lingered in my heart, a bridge between the wild and the human world that no grief could ever sever. When the days passed and the horizon stayed empty, a hollow ache settled into my bones. I stood at the gate each morning, straining my ears for the faintest rustle, the lightest pat of paws. The forest beyond lay motionless as though holding its breath. I returned inside only when the chill drove me in and then slipped back out again before the fire had fully died. Inside, silence pressed on me like a weight. I found myself replaying every moment, the pup's trusting gaze when I first appeared at the porch, the way he nuzzled his mother's final breaths, the desperate howl he raised under the storm. I remembered the older pup circling me as I patched his brother's wounds, the hush in his body that spoke of both fear and faith. Every memory cut through the quiet like a knife. On the 7th day after the younger pup's passing, I wrapped a thick coat around me and carried stones and a small bundle of wildflowers, lilies and violets gathered from the sunlit edge of the taiga. The wind tugged at my collar as I made my way to the grave. The earth there still held the imprint of my shovel's edge, and the cairn of stones I'd placed for the she-wolf felt fragile in the falling dusk. I knelt and arranged the stones neatly, building their circle higher, layer by layer, until the mound rose a hand's width above the snow-crusted ground. Then I laid the flowers on top, their petals brushing the frozen earth. I pressed my palm to the stones and closed my eyes, sensing my pulse throb against my fingertips. "I haven't forgotten," I whispered. "I remember every moment." The wind sighed through the pines, and for a moment I envisioned the older pup emerging from the trees, eyes shining, to stand guard once more. But only the emptiness answered. Night came, and I lay awake in bed, the hollow ache refusing to soften. I thought I'd seen the depth of their trust, the lengths they'd go to find me. I thought our bond would call them back, that they'd return to this little yard at twilight and sit beside their mother's resting place. The next morning, a heavy snowfall had carpeted everything in white. My breath puffed in clouds as I stepped outside, boots crunching on the fresh drifts. I paused at the gate, scanning for any sign of life. The yard was perfect and silent, unmarked by footprints, until I reached the grave. There, in the new snow at the foot of the cairn, was a single set of paw prints. One clear circle, the pads pressed into the soft drifts, as though someone had walked perfectly around the grave and then vanished. My breath caught. I leaned closer. The tracks were smaller than I'd expect for the older pup, but too large and too round to be a fox or a stray dog. A fox circle would be uneven, its toes splayed. These were precise, deliberate. I traced the prints with my finger, heart pounding. "It can't be," I whispered. "Maybe a fox." I closed my eyes, willing the doubt away, but when I opened them, the prints remained. One perfect loop. No exit mark leading back into the forest, just that solitary circle around the grave. A gust of wind whipped through the trees, lifting snowflakes around me like silent witnesses. I shivered, not from cold, but from something deeper, the recognition that the forest had answered my vigil. It had sent a final message in paw prints, an echo of their presence, a reminder that our lives had intertwined, if only for a brief, miraculous time. I stood in the drifting snow, the wind pressing against my face, and felt both emptiness and light. The grave circle was their signature, a proof I could not deny. They had come back, not to stay, but to let me know they remembered me as I would always remember them. As I turned to go, the snow swallowed my footprints. The circle remained, silent and perfect, a testament to a bond that even absence could not erase. If someone had told me this, I would have smirked. A wolf coming to a man's yard to die? No, it doesn't happen. But I was there. I remember that evening as though the sky itself pressed in close, painted in bruised purples and golds. I had just finished stacking firewood and paused at the gate to take in the sunset bath across the taiga. That's when I saw it. A dark silhouette slipping between the last light and the tree lean. My first thought was the pup, my steadfast companion through so many impossible nights, but this shape was too tall, too lean. I froze. The figure halted on the edge of the clearing and turned its head toward me for just a heartbeat. Pale eyes glowed in the dusk, no fear, no threat, only recognition. I stood rooted, heart hammering so hard I thought it might shatter my ribs. Then, as if aware that it had been watched, the silhouette lowered its head in an almost imperceptible nod. And then it melted back into the forest, leaving nothing but the echo of its glance. I lowered my hand from the gatepost and took a step forward. The grass was still warm from the day's sun, but I felt a cold sweep ripple through me. This was not the first pup, this was her, the she-wolf who had hobbled into my yard days before, whose final breaths I had cradled in the rain. She had come back to look on me one last time, not as prey or predator, but as a living soul she trusted. I dropped to my knees and pressed palms to the earth as if I could draw her presence back into the clearing. The forest leaned in, branches whispering above, and the stars peeked out one by one. In that hush, I understood they had gone, both pups, both mothers, forging onward into the unseen wilderness, but their spirits remained with me. All around, the pines exhaled. Crickets resumed their chorus. Yet I felt suspended, caught between two worlds. I thought of all the nights I had spent tending to their wounds, offering bread and water, of how they had waited for me at dusk, of the solemn circling paw prints in the fresh snow. Those moments were not accidents or curiosities, they were gifts. Each look, each gentle nudge, each mournful howl was a thread in a tapestry that bound my human heart to something far older and wiser than I could ever fully grasp. I rose slowly, brushing dirt from my knees. My body was tight with wonder, with grief, and with a fierce reverence I had never known. I walked back to the house, pausing only once more at the gate to look toward the corridor of trees. Gone was the figure I had glimpsed, but the memory burned bright in my mind. Inside, the kitchen clock ticked on. The kettle steamed on the stove from earlier that evening. I poured myself a cup of tea but could not drink. My hands trembled as I lifted the cup, and I thought of the she-wolf's eyes, ancient, patient, full of trust. She had entrusted me with her legacy, with the care of her sons, and now she entrusted me with remembrance. They left, but I stayed. I am now the keeper of their story. I am the living proof that the wild does not exist apart from us, that it can reach across the boundary and touch our souls, calling us to witness its mysteries. I must remember every detail, the way the pup would blink at the first light of dawn, the tilt of the she-wolf's head when she sought reassurance, the stillness of the graveside vigils in the rain and snow. I think of that final moment, the silhouette at sunset, as a benediction. It was her way of saying goodbye and thank you in one silent gesture. It was a lesson that love in the natural world is not soft or sentimental, but hard-won and profound. It does not demand understanding, it demands respect. If you had seen what I saw, you would know that wolves do more than hunt and howl. They feel. They mourn. They choose salvation and solidarity over solitude. They teach us that kindness can bridge the chasm between human and wild, that trust can be built not through dominion but through empathy. He looked at me as if I were his own. And I realized I am no longer just a man. I am a witness to what nature knows as love. If your heart is full of reverence now, right, nature is wiser than us.